Hello, I'm Mary Smith, President of the American Bar Association, with another episode of the ABA Presidential Speaker Series. Today, I'm excited to present Director Martin Scorsese and Chief Geoffrey Standing Bear, the Principal Chief of the Osage Nation. Helping lead the conversation about Killers of the Flower Moon is Oklahoma lawyer Jimmy Goodman, Chair of the American Bar Foundation.
The Osage. They have the worst land possible. But they outsmarted everybody. The land had oil on it. Black gold. Money flows freely here now.
I do love that money, sir.
This wealth should come to us. Their time is over. It's just going to be another tragedy.
When this money started coming, we should have known it came with something else. They're like buzzards circling our people. We're still warriors.
Based on the best-selling book, the film is a true story of greed, murder, and racial injustice that exposes a disturbing chapter in this country's history. At its core, the film underscores the critical importance of the rule of law and the pursuit of justice. For lawyers, it serves as a powerful reminder of our role in upholding justice, safeguarding the rights of all citizens, and ensuring that no one is above the law.
It's a period of time where there were a number of deaths that went, no investigations were made. And the deaths were considered, well, it was natural, they die young, they have hard lives, this and that, and all the cliches of the Native American comes into play. And in some cases, there were some murders, really not investigated properly. The book, which is, again, brilliant, it has the Bureau of Investigation guys coming in and trying to find out who did it.
Oh, I was sent down from Washington, D.C. to see about these murders.
See what about him?
See who's doing it.
When we try to write the script, it was always these guys coming in solving things. As I said, the minute you come into town, I know who did it. You're not going to surprise anybody, So then why don't we make it then? And Leo and I, we talked about it, and Leo said, why don't I play Ernest? And Ernest and Molly were the two that really were in love, and she knew he wanted money and stuff like that, but she loved him and he loved her.
What
was that?
That's how you are.
I don't know what you said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil.
It's about trust, and it's about love, and then the ultimate betrayal. And I think that microcosm of the ultimate betrayal in Molly and Ernest reflects the macrocosm of what we've done with the indigenous people.
As you mentioned, the focus started out being on all the white guys coming in, solving the problem, et cetera, like it always is. And then it pivoted to the story about Ernest and Molly's love story. And can you elaborate a little bit on how that change in perspective came about and how that changed the way you approach the film?
Well, it's a good point. I mean, the problem was for me that I love the American Western genre. I grew up watching it in the 1940s and 50s. It ended with Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch in the late 60s. The world ended. The world changed. America changed. I changed. I started making films. I always wanted to make a Western. And that's one of the reasons they gave me this book. But in approaching it as a Western, I would have to approach it through the European eye. We tried to make that fair and honest, but I couldn't go too far. And what I mean is I couldn't go too far in story and character development because I've always had there at that point Tom White, who was a good man, and his guys with him, and that's it. I couldn't go beyond that. What about the Osage? What about the people who are depicted only as victims? So we tried, myself and Eric Roth, and then Leo DiCaprio, we all tried to have him play Tom White, but I couldn't find the way to make it. Something seemed wrong about emphasizing the story from the European point of view. It just didn't seem right. And once we found out that Ernest and Molly were very much in love, at one point, Leo just looked at me, he came to my house, he said, Marty, where's the heart of the story? I said, the hearts are Molly and Ernest. He goes, well, why don't I play Ernest? And that's when everything turned around. And I always say, instead of the outside in, we were from the inside out.
Chief Standing Bear, how did you meet Mr. Scorsese, and how did you two end up working together?
Well, we were told Martin Scorsese would be in my office the next morning. And after we talked for a bit, he went on a tour of the prairie and the town. And I was getting calls back. It's a small community. And now he's over here. Now he's over there. And then later someone said, well, he's posted on Facebook or one of these social media a photo of him on the prairie. And it was an exciting day.
Mr. Scorsese, we have a question from Alma Agnati, a longtime ABA member, but she's also a blast from your past. You worked with her on Wolf of Wall Street. Alma?
How closely did you work with the Osage Nation and the FBI to ensure the authenticity of the film?
Well, we worked very closely with them. I mean, particularly the Osage Nation. Let me put it this way. The idea was to make it as authentic as possible. Now, authentic could sound didactic, I guess. It could be like a photograph in a book or something that you could just analyze in a way, almost academic. But the authenticity has to have a kind of interpretation. It has to have an artistic interpretation. But first I need the authenticity in order to interpret it. And so we had so many, we had Chief Standing Bear and Chad Renfro and Addie Roanhorse and so many people helping us. They were each one was designated in terms of cultural aspects, costumes, language, ritual. John Williams, who sadly passed away before the film was finished, but he did get to see it. In any event, myself and Mary Ann Bauer, who was my co-producer and my archivist for many years, all worked together. And I try to get as many of as many elements of the culture of the Osage in the film, whether it's baby namings, weddings, funerals, etc., whatever. But the thing about it was that there was no delineation between the Osage in front of the camera and behind the camera. We all were together. And, asking specific questions, or they'd have some suggestions come to us through to Adam Sumner, who was my AD, or come directly to me. But Marianne usually was the person in the middle. And if they wanted me to know something, they'd tell her and she'd tell me, or they'd ask me on set. It was all very, very, there was never an issue of interference, but there was collaboration, and it was all done very respectfully.
Chief Standing Bear, in recent interviews, you have spoken about how the process of the way in which Mr. Scorsese and the rest of the team worked so closely with the Osage people in telling this story, that it has sort of developed the beginnings of healing in terms of the Osage Nation and how it feels about its relationship with American society. So if you could expand a little bit more on that particular matter.
I can sum it up with something I saw last night. Was a premiere in one of our local towns, small towns. The vast majority of the theater was occupied by non-natives and good people who wanted to know more about this story. But there was parts of the movie that the crowd laughed, and which is fine. And it struck me how among my people, there's more rage, especially the younger people, Why didn't anybody tell us more about this? There was a lot of anguish expressed even afterwards. And I don't think my people see any part of it as humorous, although when you step back in a more, I think, objective view, there is humor. I was just talking about that today with some of my staff. I just think it shows the wounds to ourselves that we have. And we have to be more sensitive and considerate of these conditions. And some call it generational trauma. I've been hearing that. But I can tell you it's real. And this movie, it has a healing effect because if you've had this sore and you're not properly treating it, it can get infected and it can spread. And I have to say that we have a lot of healing to do.
I think, Chief, one of the things too about the humor, or that what becomes humor, is the nature of Ernest's character, the way we created him, how he doesn't want to face the truth. That at a certain point we laugh with exasperation, and so in a way, the humor is something that it comes from the human nature of this particular guy who's a white guy. You know, there also was another kind of humor where Kelsey Morrison tells the lawyer about his plan to take the two kids to Mexico and kill them. And the lawyer actually said, and this is a transcript, he said, "You realize, Kelsey, that what you're telling me is you're going to adopt these two kids and kill them." And he says, "Not if it's not legal." Well, that's an outrageous laugh. The audience is freaked out. They couldn't believe it. And that is, by the way, that's transcript. That's not written. And the way Louis Cancelmi plays him, he has no compunction about taking the children and killing them. What are we talking about? And so people just throw their hands up and start laughing. You know, it's a kind of weird, nervous laughter.
You know, my father went to military school, like so many of his generation, because their parents during this time period sent them away for safety. And I've always talked to my uncles and my dad and everybody about this whole time period. And it's one thing to hear about it and as the way they presented it, and it's a whole other thing to see it come alive on the screen. This movie brings this to life and the people to life. And it makes them seem like they live today. And that is we embrace this. It's I don't know one Osage that says I will never not see this movie, or I wish I hadn't seen this movie. Everybody wants to see it, and that's the power of this movie.
A question that is related to that, and this is for you, Mr. Scorsese. Was there something different in the way you addressed violence and murder with this particular subject matter and with these people than the way you've done it in prior movies?
Well, I think for a long period of time, I've been dealing with stories that took place in the underworld, so to speak, in organized crime, or people who want to be in organized crime, younger people who think they're going to make it and, you know, don't. You have some of that in Goodfellas. You have some of that in Mean Streets, quite honestly. But that's how I grew up. And in a way, being younger at that time, too, the violence was, particularly in the neighborhood I grew up, sometimes it was violence, and it was kind of exciting. We were kids, you see, and in a way. And that may have found its way into the first few pictures I made. Ultimately, Goodfellas, I think, was the one that combined all of it together and tried to show also that, you know, the violence pays at a certain point. By the time the payment is that you wind up going to jail, or you wind up dead, living this lifestyle. That's what happens in the last 20 minutes of the picture. And so over the years, there wasn't much more to say about violence that I had said in Goodfellas and Casino, and particularly in Departed. And I found that for me, the violence had to be portrayed, particularly here, not as something that was exciting, not as something that was a climactic point in the movie, almost arbitrary in a way. In fact, instead of showing, there was originally written a montage of the Osage being killed near the beginning of the film, when De Niro says they are the most beautiful people in the world, and it cuts to a series of images of people laid out dead in the beds. And I went that way rather than showing the killings. There is one or two elements where you see one person get shot, a woman get shot. But primarily, I tried to pull away so that the violence becomes something that has to be stated and not enjoyed as a film, as part of the film, as part of the filmmaking process. It reminds me of when I'm growing up. There was this incredible photographer in New York called Ouija. And his pictures very often would wind up on the cover of the Daily News and the Daily Mirror, which were the tabloids. And I grew up with that, and I still, they were like matter of fact. One of his famous pictures is of a dead body. It said dead body on Elizabeth Street. That's where I grew up, of a gangster shot. And one time I remember in 1951, the boy across the street, it was a very nice kid. He was in a robbery and went wrong, and he was killed. And there he was on the front page of the Daily News. And we were good friends with his mother. So it reminds me very much of that impact I had from seeing those pictures of Ouija, where you don't see what happened around it, but you just see, it's like matter of fact, it's there. And so I pulled back ultimately over the years about showing violence that way.
The events in this film occur 100 years ago, and you're talking about growing up in New York, but it's common human elements like greed, rage, complicity. And what do you think it says about our society today?
Well, I think our society today is, I don't know if we've learned anything. I think every generation has to learn. We have to teach every generation of kids it's not the way to go. Mm-hmm. And we have to deal with the wild youth. We know people are very excited when they're young and that sort of thing. But it's really the most important, probably most important job in the country are teachers. Teachers and parents, really. But I do think, the 60s was a tough time. There's no doubt there was a great deal of violence in America. I see that now. I'm afraid of it for the future, and particularly next year, what's going to be happening now, particularly in the world the way it is. And so, the more we learn about other people, the better it is.
Chief Standing Bear, we have a question from Kirk Kicking Bird. He is the former chair of the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice at the ABA.
Flower Moon film focuses on the exploitation of the Osage people and their resources nearly 100 years ago. How have things changed over the last 100 years?
Most of the resources are gone. That's the difference. The apparatus that allows that to happen to a great extent still exists. The remedy for this is the tribes, including Osage Nation, needs to take advantage of existing federal laws that allow for self-determination and economic self-sufficiency. Now that sounds good, and it is good, but that process involves contracting away from the federal government certain functions that many of the people, including the Osage, have grown accustomed to. And to have your property administered by your own government as opposed to the federal government causes some tension among the Osage, at least. So we know how to accomplish this, but the political will of the people needs to step up, because the forces to maintain the status quo in the government and among those who profit from it is strong. And there is a process. And secondly, education, as has been mentioned, and financial education particularly. Can you imagine if the Osage, instead of receiving a pitiful royalty interest all these years, especially when we had the big oil and gas production. What a different world it would have been if we had joint ventures at 51, 49%. Some reports show that we have had extracted from our mineral estate over 1.5 billion barrels of oil. So how can my people, any of them, be living in poverty? Why am I on my desk worried about affordable housing, making sure we have the scholarship money, when the multinational oil companies that still exist, many of them started right here? Well, we weren't prepared. So we must be better prepared. Again, it's a matter of, once again, of taking care of each other and finding a way to continue as a people, as a nation.
Well, Mr. Scorsese, there's another question from the audience. And this question is from a young man named Caleb Evans. Caleb is a law student at Oklahoma City University School of Law and president of the Native American Law Society.
Given the significance of storytelling in both Native culture and filmmaking, what's the one big thing that stuck with you throughout the process of making this film?
What I tried to do, and it's a little hard to explain, that I like going in with a script, but I don't really, at times, some of the more interesting work I think I've done, is where I have the script and I open it up and play with it. And then it's a matter of balancing different threads through this tapestry that we're trying to create. And in this case, I think we came pretty close to balancing all these elements together and not adhering to traditional structures of beginnings, middles, and ends, of three-act structure. That people always talk about third act in a movie. Acts belong on a stage. That's theater. Film is something else. Film is like music. Theater is great, but film is like music. And this film has been described by somebody as a bolero. And I said, yeah, I think you're right. Where it starts kind of wider and slower and then slowly builds and then wham, and that's a lot that has to do with Robbie Robinson's music. And Robbie, came from the First Nations, Mohawk. And so for me, what I took away from it is how to tell a story in a different way. And at the same time, grab the audience and hold them for a long period of time for a film that's over 3 hours. And have them, I hope, retain some kind of resonance where it's something, not that you go home and think about it like a school project or a homework, but it stays with you.
Yeah. Well, this question is to both of you. What should lawyers take away from the film?
Well, remember that when you're administrating the law, that there are points where the laws themselves are clearly wrong. And how do we come together and say an attorney in 1933 in Germany say, I'm not going to follow that because it's clearly a crime against humanity, where it will have that effect as we go through there. But the same idea. You're one step away from anarchy if every lawyer gets to say, well, I think that's an illegal law. So that's my observation, because we had almost every lawyer I was told by the attorneys here in this small town, there were 57 lawyers at the time in town here at the time this movie was portrayed in 1921, and every one of them had more than one ward, and that whole system just was administered by lawyers, guardianships, land partition actions, probate, all legal. But behind it was greed and often murder. So how do you handle this? It's beyond an individual ethical question. It's a question that groupthink of attorneys need to get together with, I think, social scientists to say, how do we determine the validity of law in situations where greed overcomes the rule of law? I mean, or some obscene search for power. How does that work? And I don't know. I don't know the answer. But those are questions that I've had even before I went to law school, and it's been on my mind. How do you do that? I don't know.
Mr. Scorsese?
Well, to take away, we want an audience to take away an openness, to never lose their curiosity about other people, other cultures, an openness to learn in a positive way, not, as I say, doing homework, but learn what other cultures are about, what other religions are about, and in such a way, not only to give them dignity and respect, but also how your life could be enriched. You may not necessarily agree with everything they say, but they could open your eyes to other ways of looking at what you're doing and how you're feeling, and bring you back to a kind of grounded element that you need in your life, that with all this media around and all this information, all the madness going on, you need a moment of silence. You need a moment of self-regard, and maybe a better understanding of what's around us in the world. And that has to do with nature. And as I say, I'm from the tenements downtown. And I was always allergic to anything green. So you can imagine when I first got to the prairie, but I always yearned for that, because it was something where I did start to think differently about who we are as human beings. And other cultures could bring this to us. And cinema did that for me. I would see foreign movies and say, I'd like to learn about those people. A foreign movie made in India, I'm from Sajid Ray. And I said, that's interesting. That movie looks like the movie that those people in the film, Pate Panchali, let's say, 1957, whatever. That movie looks like the people, it's made by the people who are usually in the background in the movies about India that the British and the Americans make. Mm-hmm. They're in the background, but this one here, they're in the foreground, they're making it, and what can I'm learning something here, or just, I like them. They're people, and so cinema did that for me. It opened up the world for India, Japan, Southeast Asia, China, so much around the world. And so for me, it's always be curious in your life and learn as much as you can from others. And because it can enrich your life too.
Good relationships like this, creative relationships, take time to develop and to grow and to overcome adversity. And we don't have time to talk about this, but this movie, more than a book, has caused a lot of good discussion internally among the people here that we would not have started without this movie, and it is a healing process. But I do know our relationship with Marty Scorsese and his people continues after this movie is shown.
Thanks to the two of you for such an illuminating conversation, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Stay tuned for our next ABA Presidential Speaker Series, and consider joining the ABA at ambar.org/membership. Thanks again.